All right. Thank you, Leah. Winikasuk, good day, everyone. Casey Thornbrew, and serve as the program manager for USET's Climate Change Resilience Program. And very happy for this opportunity to partner with my fellow program manager, Leah Zeiss over with the agriculture program. Excited to see many familiar faces. It's certainly been a while for some of us, so very excited to reconnect. So to start off here, we're going to do a couple things. Want to do a little round of just brief introductions, and quickly mention the agenda and some upcoming events with our USET climate change resilience programs, just to kind of put on your calendars as we're coming in up into the new year. So for today's agenda, of course, we'll be starting off with the introductions and climate update. Then very excited to have a presentation from the Seminole Tribe of Florida. That will follow with a video. So special thanks to Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Natural Resources Department for sharing their video and some of the work that they are doing. And I'll have that queued up on my end and just hit the go when we get to that point. We will then have a presentation from Chris Miller from NRCS on resilient coastal landscapes, and we'll have time for discussion, sharing of stories and ideas through that. So again, very happy to have everyone here together. And so let's just do like a quick round of hellos and introductions. I'll start with USET, and we'll kind of pass it around. And as I said, I'm Casey, I'm the program manager for the Climate Change Resilience Program. Let me hand it over to Leah.
Hello everyone, my name is Leah Zeiss. I'm the Agriculture Program Manager at USET, and I am a Oneida Nation Wolf Clan.
Awesome, thank you, Leah. Let me go ahead and hand it over to Mr. Colin Martin.
Hey, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Colin Martin. I work as the Technical Assistance Specialist with wetlands and water and sometimes wastewater for USET. So saltwater intrusion is a topic that comes up pretty often in the conversations that we have with wetlands, and excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Colin. And also want to mention another member of the climate change team, Tyler Everett, our forest adaptation technical assistant. He is out today, but he's also a member of the USET climate change resilience team. So let me go ahead and move over to, I think I recognize some names here from USET member tribal nations. And I think I see, let me start with, we have another representative from Seminole Tribe of Florida, Jill Horowitz. Hello, Jill. Did you want to maybe unmute your mic and say hello and introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, thank you for having me. I'm just in listen mode this morning or this afternoon, but very much appreciate all of you being here and looking forward to listening to everyone today. I'm the Climate Resiliency Officer for the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and I work with Stacy Myers.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jill. Let me go ahead and hand it over to Stacy Myers.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stacy Myers, and I'm the Senior Scientist and the Governmental Liaison for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I've been with the tribe for over 12 years, and prior to that, I worked 26 years for the South Florida Water Management District. So on this particular topic, I have had a lot of experience, and I'm looking forward to further discussion on this. With that, I'll turn it back to Casey.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. And we'll move on up to the Northeast, Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead.
Hi, my name is Becky Finn. I am the Environmental Programs Coordinator in the Natural Resources Department for the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Becky. Let me move on over. I believe I see Dale Oakley, Mashawampanoag Tribe. Hello, Dale. Did you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm on the phone here today. Yep. Good afternoon. My name is Dale Oakley, Mashpee Wampanoag Tribes. I'm Assistant Director of Natural Resources. Sitting with me, I have Robert Andrade, our field assistant. He'll be watching too, watching and learning. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Dale. I'm kind of going to move on to those I see right now. So I see Eric Weston. Hello, Eric. Did you want to go ahead and unmute and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon. Joining with NRCS as a conservation planner out of Wareham and West Yarmouth.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And I see Michael Gavazzi. Hello, Michael.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Casey. Thanks for the invite. I'm Mike Gavazzi. I'm the Natural Resource Specialist and Coordinator for the Southeast Climate Hub, and worked with Chris Miller on some saltwater intrusion impacts on coastal sites in the Southeast. And looking forward to learn a little bit more about how we can relate to some of the tribal concerns in the Southeast and how it applies to the saltwater intrusion.
Very cool. Thank you, Michael. Hello, Mia Halter.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. I'm the district conservationist for Southeast Massachusetts, and I work with the Aquinnah tribe, and I get to work with the Mashpee tribe, and it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And Suzanne Baker. Hello, Suzanne.
Hi, Casey. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invite. I'm NRCS in New York. I'm the state tribal liaison, and I serve on the National Civil Rights Advisory Committee to the Chief as American and Alaska Native representative. Thank you.
Awesome. Good to see you. Thank you, Suzanne. And let me move over to Chris Miller.
So I manage the Cape May Plant Materials Center of the USDA NRCS, and we work primarily with coastal plants. And I was prior to manager, I was a plant material specialist. So I worked in the southern New England states and the mid-Atlantic states, mostly on coastal stuff, but also on inland, stream bank restoration, mine lands, and things like that. So I guess I'm just a general plant recommendation specialist for difficult sites, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. And we also have a representative from NOAA here. Let me head over to Sylvia Reeves. Hello, Sylvia.
Hi there, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Sylvia Reeves here from NOAA and the National Integrated Drought Information System. I am the Northeast Drought Information Coordinator. So it's really good to hear a lot of folks from my area of responsibility here to talk about saltwater intrusion, which is something we worried a bit about out on Cape Cod this summer when the drought took us down had us looking at some very low groundwater levels. But again, with one reporting site, it's always hard. So having boots on the ground and being connected, I think, is important going forward. So looking forward to this. Thanks. And I do apologize. I will have to jump out a little early.
No problem. Thank you, Sylvia. And over to Ronald Buciolano.
Very good. Yes.
Okay.
Hi, I'm with the USGS in New York. So we've been working closely with the Shinnecock Nation out here on Long Island for a number of years since Hurricane Sandy, and we work with them on various climate change opportunities, and also looking at resiliency for the tribe. So I'm trying to feel out what other additional things that we could bring to bear to help out the Shinnecock Nation and others as part of the resiliency community. So
awesome. Thank you so much. Without further ado, let me go ahead and I'm going to make real brief announcements so we can move to our next presentation. And go ahead and share here. Okay, so just real quickly, some things coming up. The Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center is holding their 2022 Science Symposium. Sorry, I didn't have those dates right on there, but they are right here. March 29th through the 31st, and it will be in Gulf Shores, Alabama. So far, I mean, the plan is for an in-person meeting. So that's still the plan, but please stay tuned and you can check the website for updates on those. We'll be having our Tribal Climate Resilience Camp July 10th through the 15th. It's our intention to have that in person. Again, we'll be following kind of the CDC local and tribal nation guidelines to see where things are at, but just kind of want to put that up there. And also want to bring to your attention that we're going to be hosting a series of forest and wetland adaptation. And it will happen late summer through fall 2022. Specific dates are to be determined, but there's some information on our webpage on that. In the meantime, I want to bring to your attention that we have a survey out where we're asking kind of from tribal nations, like what are your primary priorities, if you will, in wetland and forest adaptation in your tribal nations, lands and waterways. So if you have the opportunity, please do visit that brief survey. It will help develop the curriculum for the speakers and series for this event. The 5th National Climate Assessment is also has begun with public outreach events. The Northeast chapter will have its on January 18th. The Southeast will be on February 1st. However, there's also the Tribes and Indigenous Peoples chapter and the Human Health chapter. I'll save this PDF for everyone on here today, so you'll be able to use the links to access those. Last, I just want to mention these are our resources, our USET Climate Change Program webpage, as well as those from regional climate adaptation science centers. So please feel free to kind of bookmark those and stay on tune for events and items coming up. So thank you again, and let's go ahead and move to our first presentation, which we have Mr. Stacy Mayers from the Seminole Tribe of Florida, and I think I want to make sure a co-host here. And
Casey, everyone should be able to share.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay. All right. I'll move it over to Stacy. The floor is yours.
Can everybody see the screen there? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, to start off with, in Florida, it is a really a great experiment in water management, in that you see the effects real time in terms of impacts from flooding and from things like saltwater intrusion and drought very rapidly, and you can see it from a standpoint of effects in just a short period of time. And that is due to, a lot of it is due to the Central and Southern Flood Control Project, which is a massive canal system network that goes through all of South Florida. And this originally was designed to provide flood control. But at one time, this is back in I think it was in the 50s and 60s, they had a series of droughts. And as a result of those droughts, they had to go back in and retrofit the central and southern flood control district canals. And they put a series of salinity control structures throughout the system. And I'll go through that a little bit more, but you know, just to give you an idea of the extent of this, you can see what the impacts on this initial drawing here relates to saltwater intrusion and the impacts of sea level rise, both on the natural systems, saltwater intrusion, and urban flooding. The saltwater intrusion impacts on the tribe are basically shown in this sort of cross-section drawing. With sea level rise, you see that it moves the heavier salt water further inland and pushes the fresh water above it. The impacts of this include that the saline water pushes that further inland, reducing the freshwater gradient. It causes the inland flooding from higher groundwater and reduced stormwater storage capacity. And in this particular case, again, that salinity control structure that I mentioned is shown here. And that relationship, I'll talk about a little bit further. The Hollywood Reservation of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, hopefully all you are familiar with that. That's located in Hollywood, Florida, just south of the Fort Lauderdale Airport. Due to its proximity to the coast and past history of saltwater intrusion, is particularly at risk. You know, a number of years ago, the South Florida Water Management District, who operates the canals throughout the system, had to take, you know, pretty extreme measures to protect whale fields from saltwater intrusion. And since that time, it has been a concern, in particular concern in this area of South Florida. So South Florida Water Management District has 15 counties, deals with 15 counties throughout South Florida. And they are responsible for maintaining the flood control system and the water supply for South Florida in terms of operating the Central and Southern Flood Control Project and those salinity control structures that I mentioned. The Water Management District and the tribe are focusing in on the impacts of sea level rise in terms of its planning efforts. We're incorporating sea level rise projections into our planning efforts. The Water Management District has mapped the saltwater front along the coast, and you can see where that is. That's designated by this red line here. This is for Broward County, which is where, again, that blue arrow depicts where the Hollywood Reservation is. But you can see that freshwater saltwater interface is now west of the reservation, essentially. It's not too far west, but it is west of the reservation. There also, as part of the planning efforts, they've established a network of wells for monitoring saltwater and have emphasized things in their planning programs, things on water conservation, use of reclaimed water, and then alternative water supplies. And again, you can see that this red line relates to how this yellow line in terms of how it's changed over time and continues to move westward. To deal with saltwater intrusion, South Florida Water Management District ensures that minimum flows or basically optimal levels in the canals behind the salinity control structures. Okay, and you remember that cross section that I showed of basically how saltwater intrusion is affecting the tribe. The photograph above the text here is a picture of a salinity control structure. That is a control structure. And you can see that the gates for the salinity control structure hold back fresh water along the coast so that it provides that head or that resistance against the saltwater, oncoming saltwater intrusion. Now, originally, these structures were designed to open from the top down. And they did that primarily, I think, for maintenance purposes, so that they could easily maintain those structures, you know, when debris and floating vegetation came down. But they realized over the years that that is problematic when you have to go from a flood condition to a drought condition. It doesn't allow you to really efficiently maintain water levels, you know, for particularly for flood control. So the district is now looking at modifying all these structures to, rather than open from the top down, but from getting leaf gates that open from the bottom up. That way they can quickly evacuate and close down the system to store valuable water on a real-time basis, you know, rather than having to, you know, continually to evacuate the system at a much lower level to ensure that flood protection occurs. So that's one new step that they're taking to try and, you know, better manage that saltwater wedge coming inland. However, you know, despite a lot of these measures that are going on right now, we're seeing a continued encroachment landward of the saltwater wedge in Broward County, and we feel it's primarily due to sea level rise. This graphic next to on the right depicts the ongoing loss of wells abandoned due to saltwater intrusion. And you can see there is a number of wells, and these are utility wells that have had to be abandoned over the years due to saltwater intrusion. And the tribe is working with the Water Management District to modify their existing minimum flows and levels to account now for sea level rise. The district has recognized the need to do this and are trying to incorporate into their planning process and their operations ways to improve maintaining that freshwater head and resistance against the saltwater wedge. And I don't know how this applies to other areas, because the Central and Southern Flood Control Project, which has hundreds of miles of canals and has the ability to manipulate water almost at an instant, is a sort of unique in that aspect. But I think the steps that the Water Management District are taking to better manage and control the system, and particularly that saltwater wedge, is the best defense we currently have against this ongoing saltwater intrusion. With that, I guess I'll take, I guess, Leah, do we take questions now, or do you want to wait till after the session? Or Casey, how do we handle that?
Let's hold questions for the discussion area unless somebody has something pressing and isn't able to stay the whole time. You can pop your question in the chat or just unmute yourself if you have a pressing question. Okay. All right, so let's do discussion right at the end. We have about 25 minutes saved for our open discussion. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy. And we'll go ahead and move on to an example, the Northeast area, Atlantic, and I'll go ahead and queue up a video. This video is on the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Quina Natural Resources page. So just want to make you all aware of that. We'll go ahead and share screen. We will share sound and optimize video clip. All right. And let's go ahead and go here. And if there's any issues with the sound, please go ahead and feel free to put it in the chat and let me know, and we'll re-queue it. Okay.
The concept of ownership was very different for our ancestors. So we call these the common lands because there were particular areas that, just as the name says, were held in common. The resources were available to anyone who needed to avail themselves of those resources.
The fragile environment at the common lands needs the dune buffer from the salt water to protect the balance of water, soil, and salinity. This area is very important to our people culturally, and it hosts some of the few naturally occurring cranberry bogs in the state, as well as a number of endangered and threatened plant species.
This has been a multi-year project to restore this area. Most of the work we're doing is in response to nearly losing Lobsterville Road and a big swath of this beachfront to Hurricane Sandy in 2012. We had a lot of washout here. A lot of the dune that was here protecting the inner common lands was swept away by the storm surge and by the high winds. We actually almost lost sections of the road because of the erosion that took place during that storm. The dredge, we started all the planning for that in 2013, and the dredge started to take shape in, I want to say it was 2015. We had an initial contractor who was unable to complete the work in 2.5 seasons of attempts. That contractor was replaced. So this past winter we had our second contractor who came in and in 19 days was able to pump the 43,000 cubic yards of sand and finish that dredging project, which was more or less the first step to this project, because without the sand we can't plant. And we had people come out in 2016 and do some planting with us. We put 19,000 stems of beach grass in the ground that year. It looks stellar. It's luscious and green and vibrant. And this year we put in approximately 19,500 stems in the middle section here. And we're hoping that next year we'll have somewhere in the vicinity of 15,000 to 20,000 stems of grass to plant on the further end of the beach between where we are now and the culvert.
We contracted Tea Lane Nursery to plant native shrubs in the dune area right close to the road. Hopefully that'll stabilize that area, and then in between the shrubs we've planted some of the grasses, and then the volunteers are out planting rows of grasses behind those to further strengthen and hopefully re-establish the dune.
This is an important project because with every storm and just weather, we're getting erosion on the beach, and the beach grass actually helps and sort of sustains that sand. It keeps that sand there. So with the weather and any storm, we're keeping the dunes and keeping our beach. I'm having a great time. We got the food truck here. Everyone's happy with that, and it's just a great time for the community to get together.
I think this beach means a lot to different people, and it means a lot of different things. We had some people here who grew up just down the road, and they heard about the project, and they just wanted to make sure that this place would be here into the future. These projects are well supported by the agencies that we have relationships with, and so they've all been very helpful in getting us to meet our goal today. And we're also going to be putting in what's called cedar shakes. So they're like thinner shingles that we're going to put into the ground, and they act similarly to beach grass, where the windswept sand should hit it and fall to the base. Those are pilot projects, and we're studying those, and we'll determine the effectiveness of the things that we're putting in place today, and then we're able to share that information with other agencies that might find success. There's a lot of this happening all up and down the coast. Storms have become frequent and strong, and so saving what you have is far less expensive than dealing with the inevitable conclusion, which for us meant nearly losing a road in a storm.
You know, I want to express our gratitude for the assistance that was rendered in order to protect this piece of our homeland.
Your help was a vital part of making this planting effort a success. We couldn't have done it without you. Katava Tanamu. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you again to Becky, Finn, and the Natural Resources Department of the Wampanoag Tribe of Gayhead Aquina for permitting us time to share this the video on their project. I think what we'll do is also save questions for the discussion time. Again, unless there's anyone who needs to jump off early and has a burning question, I'll do a minute pause here, see if that's the case. All right. Very good. Well, I'll hand it over to Leah, and maybe can introduce our next speaker.
All right, great. So this is an excellent segue because we saw some concerns, some solutions, and the way that tribes are partnering with agencies to address saltwater intrusion in a lot of different situations. So Chris Miller is going to take it from here and talk about another potential partner to consider in all of this, which is the NRCS and the plant material centers.
Well, thank you. Can you hear me okay? All right. And can you see my screen? All right, we're good. We're doing better than Microsoft Teams now. So, hey, thank you for the opportunity. And that was a wonderful segue, actually, because and this was something I wasn't even planned to mention, but the American beach grass that's commercially available throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic originated from our facility here. It's our it's the first species we actually developed back in the late 60s, early 70s here, and the original material actually came from Sandy Neck. So you're truly planting local beach grass material if in fact you purchase that material from a commercial nursery. So through the years, I've been with the agency now for 32 years, and I worked in the plant materials program for about 30. And I worked with a number of growers up in Massachusetts and out on the Cape that produced beach grass. Some have come and gone, and but there are a few currently left, like Tim Frieri, who runs the Cape Cod Organic Farm. I worked very closely with him. So I just wanted to mention that the material that's commercially available that you're planting up there most likely originated from our facility here. So I'll mention a little bit as we go along on how we select materials, but because of the time frame involved, I'm going to talk about resilient coastal landscapes, but I'm going to kind of keep this sort of high cut from the standpoint that I can't really talk in too much detail. I could talk for hours about this subject. I mean, basically a plant and soil specialist. So I'm going to focus my comments on plant applications. I'm not a geologist. I'm not an engineer. I'm pretty much a plant geek, and I've spent most of my career just figuring out what plants will work where, the right plant in the right place, so to speak. And then throughout my talk here, I'm just going to highlight a few projects that we've worked on to sort of highlight, some of the concepts I like to talk about. So, this is kind of where we're at right now. There's a lot of anxiety about what's going on, and actually real problems too. Not just anxiety about, the issue of sea level rise and how it's impacting the coast. And, you know, even in the short term, if we sequestered a lot of carbon and reduced our carbon dioxide emissions, it's still going to be a lag time of, I've been reading, somewhere in the vicinity of a few decades before we can really halt the slowdown of the sea level rise. And unfortunately, you know, the mid-Atlantic and southern New England coast is kind of in, you know, kind of ground zero for, you know, for the most of the major rise of sea level throughout the East Coast, as well as the Southeast coast, which, you know, are experiencing a lot of problems also. But from what I'm hearing from the geologists, we actually in the mid-Atlantic here, we actually have land subsidence as well as sea level rise. So that's actually contributing to, you know, to exacerbate the situation. So I would, being a plant specialist, I'd like to focus on the sustainability of plant systems in coastal areas. And some of the sort of themes I'm going to mention here in the next 20 minutes or so are, you know, improving plant diversity and soil biology and promoting, you know, pollinator wildlife habitat at the same time. So if we're going to be putting a lot of different plant species out there, you know, we might as well be trying to improve wildlife habitat. Also, we're in an ideal situation here in Cape May, New Jersey, where we're sort of in the transition, well, not sort of, we are in the transition between southern plant communities and northern plant communities. So we're in a perfect spot to bring things from the southeast north to see how well adapted they are here, and you know, and really to sort of think ahead that, you know, most of the species that we're going to be using in the future, are they going to be migrating here naturally, or that people are going to be bringing in proactively are going to be coming from the south. So, you know, everything's moving south to north. The plant hardiness zones are moving south to north. In the last update of the plant hardiness zone, we actually lost up in northern New Jersey, we lost our most northern hardiness zone 5, which is was our coldest zone in New Jersey. Our cold zone actually moved north. The hardiness zone 7 is what our warmest zone in southern New Jersey right now, and hardiness zone 8, which is currently down in you know, in the lower portion of Maryland, or right on the Maryland-Virginia line, is migrating north. So I mean, the hardiness zone actually just refers to, you know, the minimum annual, you know, long-term average low temperature in a particular region. So those hardiness zones are moving south to north. I also want to talk about a little bit about selecting and testing well-adapted genotypes of coastal plant materials for solving resource problems, coastal problems. So if you probably remember Superstorm Sandy, we certainly do here in New Jersey, because it actually came ashore in central New Jersey in October 2012. And you may remember the iconic roller coaster out in the surf due to the storm surge that hit in Seaside Heights. I actually had the opportunity of driving up through that area on the spring and summer following the October storm. And it was amazing to me to see how resilient a lot of the plants were. Not all the plants. A lot of the conifers were greatly affected by the salt spray and the storm surge. But here's on the left-hand side is, in this photo, is I don't know if you notice it, but the storm surge came right through the middle of this house and basically blew out the center of this house. Yet in May of 2013, the following spring, the magnolia was in bloom. Just a few blocks from where that roller coaster was sitting in the surf in Seaside Park. Again, the municipal building there was inundated by the storm surge, yet, you know, in midsummer, that native plant, well, there's grasses in there too, but native plant demonstration garden that we had planted a few years prior came alive. So it just really occurred to me that, you know, structures, although engineers will say they can, you know, you can make structures a little bit more resilient, it's really the plants that are most highly resilient. And that also reminds me to mention that, you know, the time of the year that these storms occur have a lot to play in how much vegetative damage occurs. So if the plants are dormant and you're getting, say, a winter nor'easter, you have less plant damage, unless you actually have plants washed out of the ground. You actually have less plant damage than say a summer hurricane, where all the plants are leafed out, they're flowering, they're growing, and then you have, you know, some kind of a storm event where you have salt spray or salt overwash. That's a situation which is a lot more worse than when they're actually dormant. The plants are actually dormant. So in our plant materials program, which was established with the, right around the same time as the agency was established in 1935, our first director, Dr. Franklin Kreider, kind of set the stage for how we operated as far as selecting plants. And his guiding principle was, and we still have the same guiding principle today, 80 some years later, that in most cases, nature has evolved a plant for almost every growing condition. So really, it's kind of encouraging to know that, or to think that, hey, there's a plant out there that's going to help us solve a problem. Whether it's wind erosion, soil erosion, salt affected soils, low pH, whatever it is, there's a plant out there that can help us do it. The challenge is actually finding the plant, selecting for it, testing for it, and making it commercially available. And that's essentially what our plant materials program does. And to even sort of further, confirm that we're sort of on the right track with how we do our work, Dr. Stephen Handel, who is a restoration ecologist at Rutgers University, who I've had a working relationship through the years, who's also the editor of the Ecological Restoration Journal. He wrote in an editorial after Superstorm Sandy that, the concern about restoring local ecotypes of plants may be, a little bit of a ruse from the standpoint that we maybe need to be looking at other areas, not just the local genotypes, but we may be looking, say in our case, looking to the south for different genotypes that can tolerate the much changing conditions we're going to have in the coming decades. So no longer are restoration ecologists looking to sort of restore these communities to what they were in the past, but what they might be in the future. So in other words, we need to take a proactive approach to introduce potentially adaptive and resilient plant species to solve our resource problems. So what makes a plant resilient? Well, here's are just some criteria we would look at when we're selecting a plant for a particular application. And no one plant's going to have all these attributes, but we try to get as many of the attributes as possible. So ability to rebound from scour or damage, especially in a coastal environment where you have wave energies, destroying the plants themselves or trying to rip them out of the sand or the ground or along the shoreline. So plants that are rhizomatous, that spread laterally, with underground roots, or shrubs that root sucker. So if the shrub is actually damaged, it'll actually regrow from the base. The tolerance to saltwater flooding and alternating wet and dry conditions. And that reminds me to mention that, when dealing with alternating wet-dry conditions, wetland plants are better adapted to dry sites than dry plants are adapted to wet sites. So in other words, you don't want to take say a coastal little blue stem, which is a really dry site plant, and have it in a wetter site where it has wet feet. It's not going to perform very well. But you can take many wetland plants and actually put them in higher and drier locations, and they'll actually respond fairly favorably to that. Their root system is better adapted to, they're adapted to wet sites, but they're better adapted to, to converting their root system over to dry than the other way around. Heat and drought tolerance, of course, is very important, for maybe future droughts that we have, and certainly our higher temperatures that they're occurring through the summer and winter. Spreading rapidly by seeds or rhizomes, and adaptable to various, environmental and soil site conditions, whether it be pH, very difficult sandy soils or gravelly soils, high or low pH, acid conditions, acid sulfate soils, things like that. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about dunes and maritime forests, tidal wetlands, and riparian buffers, and the rest of the talk here. And I'm hoping I don't cut too much into the discussion time, but this happens to be an aerial photo of the Dune System in Avalon, New Jersey, which is basically, as the crow flies, about 3 miles from here, and they've won all kinds of awards from FEMA for their coastal protection, because they have such a wide dune system. Just to the right of the off this picture here are homes. But in front of the homes, you have a shrub and tree maritime forest, and then you have a coastal grassland, as you go oceanward, and then you have your primary dune system, which is primarily American beach grass. So that American beach grass is the predominant plant that grows out on that foredune area, right in the intersection of the beach and the dune, and it really thrives on that active sand accumulation. And where it's planted, where there's no active sand accumulation, it won't be very vigorous. And that's where you need to have other plant species. You need to plan to have other species, which I'll mention, in the planting scheme. And we've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers for a few years now to broaden their palette of plant species that they put in their beach replenishment projects, because what's happening is that their dunes, when they dredge the sand from offshore and place it up on their dune system, the sand is really coarse textured and it doesn't move around as much as the natural beach sand does. And so if the only thing planted there is beach grass, it's not getting that accumulating sand around the base of the plant, like say on the left-hand side where you see there's very little sand accumulation there and the beach grass is really struggling. On the right-hand side, you have the natural beach sand that's being caught by the sand fence. You have healthy growing American beach grass out front. And then as you move in the back dune area, you see that the beach grass kind of loses vigor, but you have other plant species that are taking over. Here's an example in Cape May City, right down in Cape May proper, right at the peninsula of New Jersey, the southern point of New Jersey. There's some state land that was Green Acres property. So it was purchased by the state for open space, a few blocks of the Cape May City dune. Planted to beach grass, very little sand accumulation coming into this area. The beach grass actually grew in place. Basically each individual clump got bigger, but then at one point it started choking itself out, became very thatchy, and there was no natural succession of any other plant species growing in that heavy, thick residue. So the thought was, in some discussions with the city and the state, that Forest Fire Service would come in and burn this thatch off. And that's the picture you see on the right-hand side here after the burn. I couldn't find any photos of the actual burn itself, but that was pretty interesting to see right down in Cape May City. But you don't think about burning coastal ecosystems necessarily, except for coastal grasslands, which are a little bit further from the coast. But anyway, there was obviously a seed bank and a vegetative bank of plant material that resprouted. A lot of these new sprouts you see are salt meadow cordgrass, which you commonly associate with being in a tidal marsh, but it also grows on dunes. And then I think we proactively went in and seeded some coastal panic grass. And then I have some shots here showing what it looks like today. On the left-hand side is after the burn in 2003. And 18 years later, and use the arcade in the background, the building in the background as sort of your landmark, your point of reference. The angles and the distances are slightly different, but it kind of gives you perspective. The picture on the right here, which kind of gives you hope, after all the nor'easters and the brushes with hurricanes we've had, the dune is actually healthier now than it was back in 2003. Succession has taken place. The shrubs have moved in. You have a smattering of beach grass here, but it's mostly other things like coastal panic grass and your coastal grassland species, coastal little blue stem. You have some beach pea and some trailing wild bean and some forbs in here, some legumes, some native legumes, as well as your beach plum and bayberry. So another effort, again, I say, here we're in an ideal geographic location to look to our south. Sea oats is a predominant dune grass in the southern U.S. Out on the the Outer Banks of New Jersey, or excuse me, Outer Banks of North Carolina, up through the Virginia coast. However, our staff here proactively collected seed of various different germplasms of sea oats way back in the 1980s and did plantings here in New Jersey and even as far north as Long Island, which those plantings didn't make it. They were destroyed by storms or it was just too cold. But in 1992, the staff here in Cape May did a planting in the back dune in Avalon. And so that was 1992. It was right around the time of I think the perfect storm, which was in that time frame. We had a December nor'easter in 1991, I think. So we had some bad storms in the early 90s, as well as some brushes with hurricanes. But we thought most of the planting was destroyed, but we went back to that site back in I think it was like 2008. And lo and behold, we found about 18 surviving sea oats plants from that original planting that was done in the early 90s that were producing seed and producing seed heads. So we collected seed off that material, and we actually relocated those 18 surviving plants to our facility here. And we're in the process of selecting actually nature has selected the sea oats for us, but we're in the process of doing the paperwork and doing the seed increase and preparing this material for release to the commercial nursery industry to make sea oats available in our area here in Maryland, Delaware, and southern New Jersey to complement beach grass, since we've seen some problems with the long-term survival of beach grass. So that's sort of under the heading of looking to the south for plant adaptation. So a little bit about the back dune species. So I talked about foredune species. The coastal grassland area in the middle here between the foredune and the maritime forest. This is what it looks like here in Avalon. So it's a marvelous example of a mix of coastal little blue and salt meadow cordgrass and some beach grass and some smattering of shrubs mixed in, mostly bayberry and beach plum. And you have seaside goldenrod, which also occurs on the frontal dune. Trailing wild bean, which is an annual legume, and beach pea, which is a perennial legume, to complement the beach grass in those back dune areas. And salt meadow cordgrass. So really, the high diversity leads to high resilience. And then if you have a wide enough dune system, which they do in Avalon and a few isolated areas here in New Jersey, Island Beach State Park, and up in Sandy Hook National Seashore, up in or Gateway National Recreation Area up in northern New Jersey, then you'll have others, other species like hollies, sassafras. You'll have your shrubs like bayberry and beach plum, eastern red cedar, sumacs, groundsel, which is the baccharis. And so that's really your ultimate healthy dune system. There was a survey done after Superstorm Sandy that identified that trees were very protective of built structures. So we need to encourage more trees and shrubs along our coast. Right now they're fairly fragmented. It's mostly herbaceous materials. We've truncated the secondary and tertiary dunes, basically the coastal grassland portion and the shrub portion. And we're, in our highly developed coast, we're mainly left with that frontal dune area, which again, you're primarily looking at beach grass along with some other grasses and seaside goldenrod. But if you can incorporate more shrubs, you're actually going to be more protective in the long term. So there was a Rockefeller-funded project after Superstorm Sandy called Structures of Coastal Resilience. And there were academic teams throughout the East Coast that looked at, providing guidance for how we can sort of think out of the box for natural-based designs. And one solution that the Narragansett Bay team from Rhode Island, actually they were from Harvard, they were working on the Narragansett Bay, was what they referred to as an attenuation forest. It's basically a maritime forest that's providing the same sort of structural and protection for infrastructure that our dunes would do on, say, a barrier island, so to speak. So they were focusing on, and it was conceptual at this point. I don't know that really this whole design in itself has been actually implemented yet, but it was done by the landscape architecture team at Harvard University, Harvard School of Design, but utilizing trees and shrubs that create a dense rhizome structure and that will respond, after storm events, will respond by resprouting. If it's a tree, it's going to, put in secondary growth. If it's a shrub, it's going to sprout from the base. And that this, looking at, these resilient trees and shrubs that when they are disturbed, it actually encourages them to sprout new stems and root suckers. I know this schematic is a little fuzzy, but I just wanted to show sort of what their conceptual design was. It may involve doing some dredge material. It may involve, some submerged aquatic vegetation out here and a thin, narrow band of herbaceous plants. But most of this incorporates shrubs, in front of the maritime attenuation forest. And again, this was intended to, be damaged and, not intended to be, but, basically it was thought that eventually, storms would affect these areas, but that they would be resilient enough to resprout and even in some cases, even respond more positively to that disturbance and that damage. And sort of their master list of salt tolerant, resilient trees and shrubs are listed here. I won't read it down the whole list, but the source for this information is Rosetta Elkin. She wrote an article called Beyond Restoration, Planting Coastal Infrastructure. And it highlights these species in that particular article. So these are tree and shrub species that are, varying degrees of salt tolerance, varying degrees of ability to, to root, to stump sprout, to sprout from, from bases, from rhizomes, from crowns of, the crowns of the shrubs. And the species I have highlighted here in blue are species that are also indicated in some work by University of Rhode Island to be highly desirable for migrating songbirds and migrating birds, as far as their berries and nuts that they produce are highly nutritious. And here's just a table out of that particular citation. Scott McWilliams at University of Rhode Island has identified the most highly preferred berries for migratory songbirds. And a lot of those, there's a lot of, overlapping species from this list, as well as the resilient tree and shrub list that was developed by the Harvard School of Design. Here's some additional shrubs. Of course, bayberry is on the list. Not as the most highly desired, but definitely desired and recommended. Winterberry holly, black chokeberry. So to sort of look at this whole system from a system-wide ecotone standpoint, I know this looks a little busy here, but I borrowed this slide from Dr. Jack Gallagher, who's a coastal wetland scientist, emeritus from the University of Delaware. Been retired for about 8 to 10 years now, but still actively doing some grant projects and things, and working with halophytes or salt, salt affected plants, or basically plants that grow in salt affected soils. But if you look on the right hand side, you're talking your open water, your ocean, your bay. You have another layer of protection with your wetlands, or maybe in some cases if you're on a barrier island. And then ideally, you're going to have some sort of either natural or planted and managed buffer between that wetland and any upland systems, whether it's cropland, whether it's forest land, or whether it's structures, whether it's homes or businesses or whatever kind of infrastructure you have. And so all these different layers or ecotones interact with one another. And if one of these vulnerabilities increase, if one of these layers or ecotones is missing, so you have your storms and your storm tides and rising sea levels indicated by this red line. You have your normal daily tides indicated by this like bluish green line. And that just kind of gives you a perspective on how we should be looking at our landscapes and providing as much protection between that open water and your terrestrial ecosystem by incorporating buffers or preserving buffers if that's the case, and also preserving wetland systems. I pulled this out of a Maryland adaptation guide, but I thought that was kind of interesting that some of the concepts they mentioned here is BMPs for coastal resilience, selecting plant species that are tolerant to salinity changes, increased temperatures. Planting flood and salt tolerant plants inland from where they currently exist now in areas where wetlands may migrate or the coastal systems may migrate due to sea level rise. And then, of course, as I've already mentioned, maintaining and enhancing diversity of plantings. Just to mention a project we did with Army Corps of Engineers in the Jamaica Bay Islands up in New York City. They dredged sand from the New York City shipping channel, Ambrose Channel, and actually enlarged the footprint of some of these islands out in Jamaica Bay that had been eroding through the 1900s, since the early 1900s. They wanted to increase the footprint of some of these islands back to what they originally were back in the early 1900s. And, they used dredge sand. They relocated some islands of Spartina alterniflora and patents that were going to be, eroded away. They planted the shoreline to plugs of Spartina alterniflora and Disticulus. And then they basically they contracted with us to, collect seed, provide plants, and then do some seeding trials on the inland portions of the islands to see if they could reduce the number of planted plugs they would have to put in the ground. So we did a trial on one of the inland islands and seeded Spartina alterniflora, and sure enough, we got pretty good establishment of the alterniflora seed. It took about 2 to 3 growing seasons to get the same density of vegetation that we would get from a planted plug, but it was a lot cheaper to go with the seed than it is with plugs, and a lot less labor intensive. So based on our early trials in 2007, 2008, they actually contracted out 32 acres of seeding, using a native grass seed drill and actually seeding the Spartina alterniflora, which we had collected and cleaned here at our facility. And that was done actually just before Superstorm Sandy in July of 2012. And September 2013, this is just on the right-hand side of the slide here is a shot of what the site looked like. It was pretty well established with Spartina alterniflora primarily from that seeding activity. Something else we noticed that even though they didn't use engineering structures, rock or anything along the shoreline to keep the sand in place, they did in some areas where there was a little bit higher energy. They used the coconut fiber logs and mats, but because of ice and because of the wave energies, those coconut fiber logs were pretty much blown apart. However, an interesting thing happened. Those logs served as a substrate for the Spartina alterniflora to become established just from the natural seed that was floating around in the water. So you notice this thin line of coir fiber mat that was left behind after the storm. There's no alterniflora growing in the front of it, and there's no there's alterniflora growing in the back, but it's a little ways back. There's an area of bare sand behind it, but right in that coir fiber log was Spartina alterniflora volunteering naturally from the seed source that was floating around in the water. And then lo and behold, they started getting mussels, volunteering in at the base of the stems of that alterniflora that provided even further stabilization of that alterniflora stand. So it's kind of an unintended consequence. They were looking at the coir fiber as being the wave break, but it actually, resulted in the fact that it served as a substrate for the establishment of the alterniflora, which is kind of interesting. So other things to consider when you're looking at shoreline work is that, do you have an adequate sand supply? What's the shape and orientation of the shoreline? For example, northeast orientations are, really take a hit as far as if there's a lot of open water in the wintertime with our winter nor'easters. What's the fetch distance or wave height of the, of that area adjacent to your shoreline? Is there a lot of boat traffic? what's the naturally occurring vegetation adjacent to that particular area that you want to stabilize or consider, doing a project on. What are the salinity concentrations of the water? What are the adjacent, if there are adjacent structural measures? And the Army Corps back in the 70s came up with I guess it's called, well, they call it a vegetative treatment potential. It was basically a subjective index of, you would identify, the conditions of your site, and it would assign a number associated with it. And the higher number you had, the more your potential of your site to be stabilized with vegetation alone. And this didn't even consider sort of these hybrid approaches that the living shorelines, approaches is more recently, where you're incorporating rock, you're incorporating maybe, oyster castles or shells or things like that. This is just basically looking at vegetative alone and trying to get you an idea of whether your site is suitable for just planting vegetation. And you're looking at things like fetch and general shape of the shoreline and the orientation of the shoreline and those things I mentioned earlier, and the width of the beach and that sort of thing. And so this is actually a guide that I've used, when I go out and look at project sites and identify, whether it's a good site for vegetation or not, or whether there's going to need to be an engineered solution, or whether there's going to need to be a hybrid solution where you're incorporating plants and structures.
So Chris, we're getting into discussion time. Do you have
Okay.
a few final thoughts before we switch over to discussion?
All right, well, let me just finish on this then. Prime Hook National Wildlife did a large project after Superstorm Sandy, where basically the dune system was breached during Sandy, and what they were trying to maintain as fresh water behind the dune system became saltwater, obviously, as the Delaware Bay, basically busted through their dune system. So rather than fighting nature, they decided that they were going to go with an approach where they would reestablish a dune system. However, it would be a much lower profile dune system than the Army Corps typically designs. So the Army Corps designs in their beach replenishment projects, they design a trapezoidal dune where it's basically 15 foot high in elevation, and it's sloped on the front side and it's sloped on the back side. Well, the Prime Hook folks decided to go with a much lower profile dune where it wasn't so sloped. I think the maximum height was about 9 feet. And so basically they were allowing, future storms to actually overtop and overwash this dune system into the back dune, the back salt marsh area. So rather than trying to maintain this area's freshwater, they planted high marsh right on the backside of that dune system. They dredged a number of channels through this area and reestablished that dredge material with salt tolerant plant species. Much of it was aerial applied because it wasn't accessible by equipment, and so they used the Seeds of Success program, which is a Bureau of Land Management program, which we had been integrated with in cleaning some wild collected seed. They actually used a lot of the seed that was actually cleaned at our facility for that aerial seeding activity. And they're very, very pleased with how that project is working now. And it's definitely, much more resilient system than it was in the past. So with that, Leah, I will talk. I will stop. I will stop talking.
Thank you, Chris. That was a lot of really great information. And I just want to make sure that we have time for folks that are on the call representing tribes to chime in with what they're seeing, what their concerns are, what they're thinking about in terms of saltwater intrusion and coastal restoration. So the floor is open now if anybody would like to chime in. Yes, Dale. I see that you raised your hand. You may need to unmute. Let's see. We still cannot hear you. Chris, would you mind ending your screen share?
Oh, sure. Stop share. Okay.
There we go. Dale, we can't hear you. I don't know if you want to type your comment or question into the chat, or if we can find a way to unmute.
While we're working on that, I had just a quick question. Chris, thank you for your presentation. One of the things you mentioned is, with restoration of dune sites, the coarseness certainly of the sand matters tremendously. And if you are in a position where you have local sand, that's great. But sometimes, as you know, sometimes that there is dredging, and then there's getting sand from other places. So my question is there like a resource that can show kind of what the minimum grain size is, or would be recommended if you were planning to use it for beach grass?
I'm not actually aware of any like hard and fast like grain sizes that would be most desirable. That's something we've been thinking about trying to develop, just based on what we see for plant performance. So in other words, going out to natural systems and seeing where the beach grass is doing well and growing vigorously because of the sand movement, and sort of identifying what grain size that is. But I would say that the finer the better, because obviously the finer, the more it's going to move around, the more it's going to accumulate around the base of the plant, and most likely the beach grass will respond positively to that. The thing with the offshore dredging that the Army Corps does is that it's bringing a lot of shell fragments and a lot of like really pea-sized gravel, and that material just doesn't move. I mean, it stays in place. And I also think there might be something chemical going on with with that. It might have sulfates in it, or maybe the salinity, immediately after pumping the sand is still pretty high, maybe more so than what the beach grass really wants to grow in. So I think there's a number of things going on, not just the grain size, but I think there may be something chemical going on. But nevertheless, I mean, I've seen situations where if there are other species in the planting besides beach grass, the dune was fairly well vegetated, even though it was obvious that the beach grass didn't survive long term. So as long as you have that diversity, as long as you have those other species there, salt meadow cordgrass, coastal panic grass, switchgrass, coastal little blue stem, seaside goldenrod actually volunteers in on its own. If there's any seaside goldenrod growing in the area, it will volunteer in those areas where the beach grass has died very readily. Ironically, we have a hard time establishing seaside goldenrod when we actually try to intentionally seed it, but when it volunteers naturally just fine if it's on site.
Thank you, Chris.
And Dale's question for you, Chris, was if your presentation can be made available to the participants, your slides?
Oh, yes. I can send them directly to him, or I can make them available to you for everybody, or and there's some additional information I didn't have time to cover because I always add more slides than what I have time for. So I apologize about that, but you'll get some bonus information if you get my slides.
Great. Becky?
Chris, I wanted to thank you for this. This was, excuse me, this was really interesting, and it was giving me more ideas.
Good.
Beach grass planting for us has started to become an annual party almost.
Uh-huh.
It's an all volunteer effort, and it's been really amazing, and we'll be doing it again this year. And we've been getting most of our plant material, beach grass and native shrubs, from Cape Coastal Nursery.
Okay.
And I'm giving a shout out to Mia right now for all the help she's been giving us as well with obtaining plant material and with all of our numerous questions.
Great. Yes, she's a wonderful resource.
Thank you.
Something that really stuck out to me was your list of species and how many of them are medicinal plants as well. So of
Oh,
interest not only to wildlife and pollinators, but also to people who would use those for medicines.
well, are you referring to primarily the trees and shrubs?
Yeah, you had elderberry
Yeah.
on there, you had willow on
Yes.
there. There was a number
Yep.
of, yeah, the goldenrod.
It's interesting how the same species seem to pop up for multiple purposes, whether it's for migratory songbirds, or whether it's the salt tolerance, or whether it's resilient to all these different varied coastal conditions, or like you're saying, from a medicinal standpoint. It's amazing how you have this suite of species that there's an awful lot of overlap. So I think what we need to do is just really concentrate on those species, because they have so many different varied values.
Yeah. We had a Plant Materials Center webinar last week with Shauna, or earlier this week with Shauna, at the New York station, and we were talking about collecting native plant species and storing those seeds to be grown and then used in restoration efforts. And I'm wondering if you have been in contact with any tribes so far, or are able to grow species of cultural concern and do any kind of research that might be of interest to the tribes in that area.
Well, we actually, a few years ago, we had a project with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe with Casey, actually, when he was there. We went out in the field and we collected some materials, and we've since provided back.
Oh, we lost
some production at the farm, and some what else did we provide? Sweetgrass. Now the sweetgrass actually came from Big Flats, New York, from Shauna. So we were appreciative, because we didn't have any here at the time. So we were appreciative to get that material from Shauna. But the Eastern Red Cedar came from us. The Beach Tribe, some Eastern grass came from us. And I think there was a smattering of a few other species that we may have provided. But yes, we have done some work directly with tribes.
And to add on to that, I think going back to 2016, 2017, we had our AmeriCorps Vista volunteer tribal citizen go down to get some of the storing and collection training down at the Cape May Center, and then bring back some of those plants up. Kind of in related to that, it's really interesting, and maybe if others want to comment on it, I think, when I think of dealing with saltwater intrusion and sea level rise, this is such especially big in the East, is, it on our tribal homelands, there's just now multiple jurisdictions. And so, like if we take Mashpee, for example, like some of the areas that are of like cultural importance and places that we would go to, when you're thinking like jurisdiction level, you're like, all right, well, this is like South Cape Beach Park, or this is town, and things like that. And when we started thinking about this back in like 2016, it was like, how do we get folks at the table and on the same on the same page? There's certain situations where on tribal lands and tribal trust lands, you're like, okay, this is what we need to do, and we're going to do it. You just do it. But when you're looking at space that's expanding, and there's other jurisdictions and things like that, but the ecosystem covers it all, the tribal homelands covers it all. In my experience, it's needed to try to get everyone to the table, and sometimes that's not easy, but I'm just kind of putting it out there, see if anyone has had experiences with that, and what worked good and what were lessons learned. Like I said, just kind of putting it out there if anyone wants to weigh in on that.
I was really impressed with the number of partners involved in the Lobsterville beach restoration project. That's really incredible. That's a really good example of cooperative work together.
the whole project was, and we are so grateful for all of the help. And we certainly didn't expect 80 volunteers to show up. We're so glad they did. It was such an interesting and wide variety of volunteers from all aspects of island life as well, between the football team with a young man who is now, years later, one of our new rangers, to impress us with his prowess for bringing in other volunteers, and the garden club, the Fisher Persons Association, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts. There was a group who were cancer survivors there to celebrate being cancer free. It was just amazing. It was really, really wonderful.
It's amazing how beach grass can bring people together. Even like the municipalities here, some of the municipalities in southern New Jersey, like Avalon, which I mentioned, that had such a good dune system there. They have annual planting days there, and they just get homeowners who, in off cases, it's second homeowners. You know, folks that live in New York City or live in Philadelphia that have a second home down here at the shore. They'll come down and help plant. They'll help plant beach grass. You know, you have the Surf Rider Foundation, American Littoral Society, all these groups, these nonprofit groups, which will help plant. It's pretty interesting.
I think one lesson learned from the video is have a food truck or have food.
That's always good. That's always good.
Yeah, not only that, it was really good food too. And folks keep coming back, and we've been doing this for about almost 5 years now. And we're gonna do it again this spring. And it seems, and folks are now looking for it. They want to do something, especially in April, when they've been cooped up all winter, and they want to get out, and they want to help, and they want to feel good about their area. And it's wonderful. We're grateful.
That's great. Ronald, I see your hands up.
Yes, yeah, I want to come at it from a different direction. So, you know, like I said, we've been working with the Shinnecock Nation for a number of years now on a number of different environmental issues, you know, looking at the hydrogeology, the groundwater, you know, oyster contamination, you know, oyster bed contamination, things like that. And, you know, we've been trying to sort of get to the finish line with them in trying to develop sort of a peninsula-wide model for them to show how sea level rise will affect the community, and how saltwater intrusion might affect the community as well. And you know, we'll see some of the natural vegetation maybe being inundated and things like that. And, you know, we've been having sort of a hard time, you know, getting to that finish line. Where do you feel that the best, you know, how to best get to that point? Who would be the, you know, the folks that we want to bring to the table and sort of discuss how to get to the point to where we can get them a working model of their peninsula, and so they have what they need to, you know, for their resilient communities. If there's any advice, I'd like to know, because, you know, we've been having a challenge getting to that point.
Well, I primarily work with Siobhan at Shinnecock. She's the
I
environmental.
work with Siobhan all the
director.
time. Yeah.
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 I know they're in a position where they have very few staff and a lot of work to do. So it may just be a situation of that, but that would be something that I would work directly with Siobhan with. I know that, you know, she has a big task at hand, and there are many people within her nation that wear many hats and try to do a lot of good within the nation. So I don't want to speak on her behalf, but I just know that is the situation there.
Yeah, no, I saw that she was on early, and I know that Viola left as well recently, so she is short-staffed. But yeah, we've been working together. I'm just wondering if there was any other insight that, you know, we could bring to the table where we could help. But thanks, appreciate that.
Okay, the other thing that sprung to mind for me was just knowing that there are a couple of nations within the USET member tribal nations that have started growing their own culturally significant plants for restoration efforts. Is that something that's of interest within your nation, Becky, or the other nations that are present today?
I think that would be of interest. We've got several landscapers who are also artists that live right here in tribal housing, would be very interested in growing, and I'm sure that the education would want to look into it as well. The environmental department, the natural resources department, is so tiny and so thinly stretched that it's hard to make any kind of commitment, because right now, unless somebody else outside of our department will commit to taking on something like this, 9 times out of 10, I can guarantee you it'll fall on our shoulders, and there are only 5 of us, and 2 are running the lab. So.
Absolutely. You're not alone in that struggle. A lot of places are strapped for human resources. So the other thing that I thought might connect to this is the events that Casey mentioned coming up, the Tribal Resilience Camp that's going to be hosted in July, and thinking about how a lot of this is connected to, you know, the change in climate that we're seeing, the increase in storm events and whatnot, and how this might be something, a good topic to bring to a camp like that. Casey, do you want to talk more about that?
Sure. So we are planning to have our camp this coming year. We actually held the camp this past year, but virtually, which was really interesting to do a virtual camp. But it is an opportunity to bring priority concerns from your tribal nation to the camp and kind of work on a project. Actually, there is a deliverable at the end of the camp, like a small presentation on your priority and how to get your community involved in your action plan. So we look to have ideally teams from tribal nations, like we always aim for like a team of 3. And it's even better if the folks are from like maybe even a different department or different space in that tribal community, to have different perspectives and unique perspectives. So so that's on the docket for this year. We are working right now with the Scudic Institute in Winter Harbor, Maine. Still planning to do in person, but going to take these first couple months just to see, get kind of lay of the landscape, and but ideally we'd like to have it in person and set up with some hybrid participation available for any that would like to be there. So yes, the camp is really a great opportunity. And I just also want to mention, since we have Colin also with us, is we are doing that virtual webinar series on forest adaptation and wetland, including coastal wetland protection. So bringing those concerns and priorities to that is also very important. And so Colin, did you want to add anything to that, or mention anything about the survey, or?
That's I think that's mainly it, Casey, what you had mentioned. Yeah, we're hoping to have a focus and tailor each webinar specifically to the specific bioregions within the USET region for wetland areas and forest areas that are being impacted by climate change. And part of that is, I think, Casey, you had mentioned in the beginning of the webinar series, is trying our best to tailor that specifically to the needs outlined by tribal environmental directors. So with the survey that's been distributed that Casey mentioned, it would be awesome to have any feedback if anybody would like to see any specific topics covered within the webinar series as we begin to plan it. That's kind of our intention and goal. So just wanted to mention that. as well. I think Casey had distributed that link or mentioned that earlier, but thanks, Casey. That's the only thing that I would add.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, Colin.
So we are on time now. We're a bit over time, I suppose. But I will be sending out the recording to this webinar, the presentation that Chris offered, a link to the video that was provided, and then of course a link to the events that Casey and Colin are going to be putting on coming up next year. So I really appreciate everybody's time and input. If you have any feedback for the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or Casey or anybody at USET. We can make sure that these webinars stay relevant to you and are useful to you, because that is our purpose.
All right. It was a pleasure being involved. So Leah, I'll just send my presentation to you.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And thank you,
can
Stacy.
distribute it.
Thank you all.
Welcome. Thank you.
Have an excellent
Thanks,
day.
everyone.
Thanks.